The city was dying. Smoke curled into the dark sky. Hiding the weak light of the moons, buildings stood broken like teeth knocked out of a giant's mouth. The air smelled of burned metal and blood. Every few seconds, far in the distance, something exploded. But here in the middle of the street, there was silence. Lyra could barely stand. Her legs trembled with every step. One arm hung useless at her side. The other clutched a cracked energy blade. Her breathing was loud in her own ears. The helmet's visor kept flashing warnings, low power. Critical injuries, dehydration, she ignored them. She had to. Stopping now meant dying. Her enemy knew that too. From the shadows ahead, 3 figures moved slowly, their armor glowing faintly in the dark. They were not in a hurry. They knew she could not run far. One of them even laughed, a deep, ugly sound. End of the line? Alien, he mocked, his voice distorted through his mask. Lyra shifted her weight, trying to raise the blade higher. The movement sent sharp pain through her chest. Her vision swam. She could taste blood in her mouth. Still, she refused to drop her weapon. The 3 enemies spread out. They were enjoying this. She could see it in the way they moved, relaxed. Confident, cruel, they wanted her to collapse before they even reached her. She took one slow step back and hit the corner of a fallen wall. No more room to move, nowhere to run. Her heart pounded. This was it. She thought of her family, long gone. Her squad scattered. She was the last one left. If she died here, no one would even know. Then, through the smoke, a voice spoke. It wasn't loud, but it carried a strange calm. Need a hand. Her head turned sharply from behind the remains of a collapsed transport. A figure stepped out, not in alien armor. Not one of her kind. He wore no helmet. His face covered in dirt and ash. His eyes steady, human eyes locked on hers. A human, here. In the middle of a war zone where no human had been seen in months. Impossible. The enemies hesitated too. One tilted his head as if confused. What is this? Another stray? One of them growled, but the human didn't answer them. He walked forward, slow and sure. In his hands was a weapon she had never seen before. Short, metallic, glowing faintly blue at the edges. The leader of the enemy group barked a laugh. You think you can fight us with that toy? The human's lips twitched into the smallest smile. Let's find out, he said. It happened fast. Before the first enemy could aim, the human moved not like a soldier in armor. Not like a desperate survivor. He moved like someone who had done this 1,000 times. The weapon fired without sound. Just a flicker of blue light, the nearest enemy dropped instantly. Armor smoking, the second charged, but the human sidestepped. Pulling a short blade from his belt, one strike, and the attacker fell. The third enemy, suddenly unsure, stepped back, but the human didn't chase. Instead, he glanced at Lyra. You look like you're about to fall over, he said. Stay behind me. She blinked at him. Too stunned to argue, her knees gave out for a moment, but before she could hit the ground, his hand caught her arm. It was steady, strong. Not the hand of someone who was afraid. The last enemy turned and ran into the smoke. The human didn't follow. He looked at her again. Eyes scanning her injuries. You're hurt bad, he said. She swallowed, forcing her voice to work. Why? Why are you here? He looked away for a moment, scanning the street for more threats. Then his answer came, quiet but certain. Because no one else came, she stared at him. Something about those words felt heavier than the smoke around them. In that moment, she realized he wasn't here for glory. He wasn't here because he had to be. He was here because someone had to. A new sound echoed through the street. Boots. Many of them. The enemy reinforcements were coming. The human turned his head toward the noise and smiled faintly. Well, he muttered, looks like we're not done yet. Lyra's grip tightened on her cracked blade. Her body screamed in pain. But she found herself stepping closer to him. They stood side by side in the broken street. Two strangers. Two different worlds facing the same storm. The smoke shifted, and the enemy shapes began to appear. This time, there were more than three. A lot more. The human's fingers flexed around his weapon. "Let's make this interesting," he said. Lyra almost smiled, even at the edge of death. He sounded like someone who believed they could win, and for the first time in hours. So did she. The air grew heavier as the enemy shapes became clear. Dark armor, glowing red visors, and weapons humming with deadly energy. They moved with the confidence of hunters who believed their prey had no chance. Lyra's heart pounded. Her breathing was ragged. Her body told her to fall down and stay there. But the human's presence kept her standing. He didn't seem afraid. Instead, he rolled his shoulders once, like a man preparing for work. His weapon, that strange, short, metallic gun, made a soft hum as it powered up. He glanced at her only once. "Keep your head down," he said calmly, before she could reply. He stepped forward. The enemy leader raised his hand, signaling the squad to spread out. Two targets, the leader growled through his mask. The aliens already half dead. Kill the human first. That was their mistake. The human moved before they could blink. One quick dash to the side, and he fired a beam of blue light cut through the air. Striking the first soldier in the chest, the armor smoked, and the soldier dropped instantly. The others shouted in their strange language, firing at where he had been. But he was no longer there. He used the ruins for cover. Slipping between shadows like a ghost, every time he appeared, another soldier fell. Lyra watched in shock. She had never seen anyone fight like this. Her people fought with precision lines and tactics. This human fought with chaos, unpredictable, fast, creative. It was like he was playing a game only he understood. Two soldiers tried to flank him. He ducked behind a broken wall, grabbed a loose chunk of stone, and threw it into the smoke. The sound made the soldiers turn toward the wrong spot. In that instant, he leaped out from behind them and struck. One went down from a clean blade strike, the other from a shot to the visor. He moved toward her then. Crouching beside the wall she was using for cover. "You still alive?" he asked with a half smile. She nodded, though her legs were trembling harder than before. He tossed her something, a small silver capsule. "Bite it. It'll help with the pain." She hesitated. "Trust me," he said simply. She bit into it, feeling a bitter liquid spread across her tongue within moments. The pain dulled and her breathing steadied. Her vision cleared enough to see what was happening, and it stunned her even more. The remaining soldiers were no longer advancing. They were hesitating, regrouping. The human had taken down nearly half their squad alone. One of the enemy soldiers shouted angrily, and they charged together. The human didn't back away. Instead, he stepped forward, meeting them head-on. He fired twice, rolled to avoid a blade strike, and smashed his elbow into the attacker's helmet. The soldier crumpled. Another tried to grab him from behind. Without even looking, he twisted his arm back, fired a point-blank shot, and the enemy dropped. Lyra found herself raising her cracked blade and stepping forward. She didn't know why. Maybe it was because she didn't want to watch from the sidelines anymore. Maybe it was because his courage made her forget she was almost too weak to move. She caught an enemy who was aiming at the human's blind side. Her blade struck his weapon, knocking it away, and she slashed across his chest plate. The human glanced at her briefly, a small nod of approval. "Not bad," he said, before turning to fire again. The fight continued like that, him moving with impossible speed and precision. Her covering his sides, blocking strikes that would have hit him. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to, somehow. They moved together like they'd been fighting as a team for years. Within minutes, the street was littered with fallen enemy soldiers. The survivors ran back into the smoke, not daring to push forward. Silence fell again, broken only by the hiss of cooling weapons. Lyra leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Her hands trembled from exhaustion. The human reloaded his strange weapon and crouched beside her. "You did well," he said simply. She gave a tired laugh. "I could barely stand," she admitted. "Still," he replied, "you didn't fall." She looked at him then, the dirt and blood on his face, the steady eyes. This strange mix of recklessness and control in everything he did. "You're not from here," she said quietly. "No," he answered, "I'm not." "Then why?" She asked again. "Why risk your life for me?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood, scanning the smoke-filled street. Then he finally said, "'Cause nobody should die alone in a place like this." Her chest tightened at his words. There was something in his tone, not pity. Not duty, but something deeper. Before she could reply, the distant sound of heavy engines rumbled through the ground. She knew that sound. Enemy transports, more were coming. The human's expression didn't change. He adjusted his weapon and gave her a sharp look. "Think you can walk?" She nodded weakly. "Good," he said. "Because we're not done yet." They began moving through the ruins, together. The human leading Lyra close behind. The smoke swirled around them, hiding their shapes from whatever hunted them next. But even as her body ached, she realized something. For the first time since the battle began, she wasn't afraid. His ground shook as the heavy engines grew louder from the haze of smoke and dust. Shapes began to appear, large armored transports rolling slowly through the street. Their thick wheels crushed debris under them, their headlights slicing through. The shadows, each transport carried more enemy soldiers, weapons ready, eyes glowing red through their helmets. Lyra's breath caught. Her body was already on the edge of collapse. She glanced at the human, expecting him to suggest hiding, but he didn't. Instead, his gaze locked on the lead transport, studying it like a puzzle he meant to solve. "We can't fight that many," she whispered. "Not head-on," he agreed. "But we can break them apart." His voice was calm, too calm for the situation. It made her wonder if he'd been in worse battles than this. He pointed toward a crumbling building to their left, high ground. "You cover me from there. I'll draw them in." She blinked at him. "You'll what?" He smirked. "They'll focus on me. You make sure they regret it." Before she could argue, he moved, not running blindly, but fast and deliberate, slipping. Between the rubble and broken walls, the enemy spotted him almost instantly. Shouts filling the air. The sound of weapons charging echoed like thunder. Lyra forced her legs to move, pushing herself toward the building. The stairs inside were broken and unstable. Every step groaned under her weight, dust falling around her. Her body screamed for her to stop, but she didn't. By the time she reached the top floor, her vision was swimming, but she had a clear view of the street below. The human was a blur of movement. He darted between cover, firing quick bursts from his strange weapon. Every shot was precise, forcing the enemy soldiers to stay low. He wasn't trying to kill them all. He was controlling their attention, making them focus entirely on him. Lyra took a deep breath, raised her cracked blade, and gripped it with both hands. It wasn't a perfect weapon, but from this height, she could throw it with force. When one soldier tried to flank the human from behind, she hurled the blade down. It struck the enemy's arm, knocking his weapon away. The soldier shouted in pain, giving the human the opening to finish him with a clean shot. He glanced up toward her, and for a split second, their eyes met. He gave a short nod before rolling. Away from incoming fire, the battle became a rhythm. He drew them out. She disrupted their attacks when he couldn't see a threat coming. She warned him with a sharp shout when she spotted a heavy gunner aiming for her position. He took them out before they could fire. The enemy was growing frustrated. They weren't used to prey that fought back in perfect sync. One of the transport drivers revved the engine and charged forward, trying to crush the human under the massive Wheels, at the last second, the human dove aside. Planting a small device against the transport side, he rolled away and shouted up at her. "Cover your ears." She didn't have time to ask why. The explosion answered for him. The blast ripped through the transport, flipping it onto its side. The shockwave rattled the building she was in, dust raining from the ceiling. The surviving enemies staggered, dazed from the blast. The humans seized the moment, sprinting forward and taking them down one by one. Lyra climbed down as quickly as she could, her blade retrieved from the street where it had fallen earlier. By the time she reached him, the street was quiet again, except for the crackle of fire. From the wrecked transport, her chest rose and fell heavily as she stood beside him. "That was insane," she managed to say. He shrugged like it was nothing. "Worked, didn't it?" Before she could reply, another sound reached them, the low hum of drones. From above, 3 small enemy drones swooped down, scanning for heat signatures. "They'll call more in," Lyra warned. The human didn't panic. "Then we move." "Before they can," he said, already pulling her toward a side alley. They weaved through the narrow paths between collapsed buildings. Lyra's legs felt heavier with each step, but the human's grip kept her steady. She noticed something strange. He didn't just move like a soldier. He moved like someone who'd spent years surviving behind enemy lines. Every turn he made avoided open spaces. Every stop was behind solid cover. Finally, they reached an old marketplace, long abandoned and filled with broken stalls. The human stopped, scanning the area. "This will work," he murmured. More to himself, then to her. "What will work?" she asked, still catching her breath. He crouched beside a stall and began pulling small metallic discs from his pack. "Ambush," he said simply. "They'll come looking for us. We make them pay for it." She realized what he was doing, setting explosives in hidden spots between the stalls. It was risky if the enemy spotted them too soon. They'd be trapped in the blast, but looking at him, she saw the same steady confidence he'd had since he appeared. Somehow, she believed he could pull it off minutes later. The distant sound of marching boots echoed through the alley. The human positioned himself behind a collapsed stall, motioning for her to stay low beside him when the first enemy soldier stepped. Into the marketplace, the human didn't fire immediately. He waited. Let them all come in. Let them feel safe. Only when the last soldier had entered did he press the small trigger in his hand. The explosions erupted in a chain, tearing through the marketplace in a storm of fire and smoke. The enemies fell, some instantly, others scrambling in panic. Lyra and the human rose together, striking down the survivors before they could regroup. When it was over, the smell of burning metal filled the air. Lyra turned to him. "You could have run when you found me," she said quietly. He met her gaze without hesitation. "Yeah," he said, "but then you'd be dead." And with that, he walked ahead. She followed, feeling for the first time in hours that maybe they had a chance. The marketplace still smoldered. Fires licked at twisted metal, sending black smoke curling into the night sky. The ground was littered with the enemy's fallen soldiers, their red visors cracked and dark. For a brief moment, there was silence again. Lyra leaned against a burnt stall. Catching her breath, her arms ached, her legs felt like stone. But her heart was beating fast, not just from exhaustion, but from the strange rush of still being alive. The human stood a few feet away, reloading his weapon with quick, practiced motions. His eyes kept scanning the shadows, as if expecting something. "Is it over?" she asked. He shook his head. "No." His voice was firm. "They'll hit back harder now." Almost on cue, the distant whine of engines filled the air. Not the slow grind of transports this time. These were faster, smaller strike crafts, the kind used for rapid assault. The sound grew louder, echoing off the ruined buildings, Lyra's grip tightened on her cracked blade. Her body was ready to drop, but her mind refused. The human glanced at her. "They'll come from above and around? We can't stay here." He moved toward a narrow alley on the far side of the marketplace. She followed, every step sending a jolt of pain through her legs. They emerged into another street, this one lined with shattered shop fronts and leaning walls above them. Dark shapes cut across the sky, enemy strike crafts circling like vultures. Then the sound changed. The whirr of mechanical wings joined in. Drones, dozens of them, descending fast. Their scanning lights sweeping over the rubble. The human cursed under his breath. "They've got us pinned," the first drone spotted them, its light locking onto their position. A high-pitched alarm blared within seconds. Enemy soldiers were pouring in from both ends of the street. Lyra felt the familiar spike of fear. They were outnumbered, again, badly. The human didn't freeze. "Left side, now," he barked, pushing her toward a half-collapsed building. Blaster fire ripped through the air behind them, striking walls and sending chunks of stone flying. Inside the building, dust swirled as they moved. The human kicked over a heavy table and shoved it against the doorway. "Won't hold them long," he muttered. "But we don't need long." He dug into his pack and pulled out 3 small cylindrical devices. "What are those?" she asked. "Surprises," he said, setting them on the floor and activating them. They began to emit a low hum. Lyra realized EMP charges, they'd knock out the drones and disrupt enemy weapons. If they detonated in time, the sound of boots and mechanical wings drew closer. Shadows passed over the windows. The human raised his weapon. "When they breach, keep low and stay to my right," he told her. Her heart was racing, but she nodded. The first blast blew the door inward. Smoke and light burst into the room as enemy soldiers stormed in. The human fired immediately. Dropping 2 before they could even aim, Lyra ducked under his line of fire, using her blade to slash at one who got too close. More poured in from the side. The human shifted, his movements sharp and precise, each shot finding its mark. But they kept coming. Lyra felt the heat from their weapons scorch the air near her face. Then the EMP charges detonated. A pulse of blue energy rippled through the building. Every drone outside froze mid-air before crashing to the ground. The enemy soldiers' weapons flickered and died. Leaving them with only blades, the human didn't hesitate. He switched to his knife, moving like lightning. Lyra fought beside him, her strikes clumsy compared to his. But fueled by sheer will, one by one, the enemies fell until only a handful remained. They backed away, shouting into their coms for backup. The human grabbed Lyra's arm. Time to go. They burst out the back of the building into a narrow alley. The city felt even more hostile now, every shadow hiding possible death. From somewhere far off, the deep boom of heavy artillery echoed. Lyra froze. Recognizing the sound, orbital support fire. "They're calling the big guns," she whispered. The human's jaw tightened. "Then we need to disappear before this whole block becomes a crater." They moved quickly through twisting alleys, the ground vibrating beneath their feet. Twice they had to duck into abandoned doorways as patrols passed by. Every second felt like a race against an unseen clock. Finally, they reached the edge of the district, where the buildings thinned and the open streets began. In the distance, the blackened remains of a communication tower rose into the sky. The human pointed to it. "That's where we're going." "Why?" she asked. "Because if I can get to that relay, can call in something they won't expect." Before she could ask what, the air above them roared. A massive enemy dropship swept low, its spotlights flooding the street in white. The human grabbed her and yanked her into cover just as the first volley of fire tore through the ground where they'd been standing. Chunks of pavement flew, the shockwave making her ears ring. The dropship turned, circling back. They were trapped again. Lyra's chest tightened. There was no way they could outrun it. The human looked at her, calm even now, when it comes. In low again? We run under it, he said. That's suicide. She hissed. Only if we're slow, he replied, a faint grin on his face. The dropship came in for another pass, its engines screaming. The human counted under his breath. 3, 2, 1. Move. They sprinted forward, the roar of the engines above them drowning out everything else. For a moment, the world was just wind, heat, and the pounding of their feet. They dove into an alley on the other side, just as the dropship fired into the empty street. The explosion shook the ground, but they kept moving. The human glanced back with a satisfied look. See? Not dead. Lyra didn't answer. She was too busy realizing something. The enemy wasn't just trying to kill them anymore. They were hunting them like they were the most dangerous threat in the city. The alley was narrow and dark. The only light came from the burning street behind them, where the dropship's last attack had turned stone to fire. The air smelled of smoke and scorched metal. Every sound seemed louder here, their footsteps, the crackle of flames, and somewhere far away, the slow thump of enemy artillery preparing for another strike. Lyra followed the human close, her blade still gripped tight. She noticed something in his movements now, the slight hitch in his step, the stiffness in his left arm. He was hiding it well, but she had fought beside him long enough to recognize the signs. He was hurt. Are you? She began. Fine. He cut her off, not looking back. But when they reached the end of the alley, he paused to scan the street ahead. And she saw the dark stain spreading across the side of his jacket. Blood. Her breath caught. When did that happen? She asked sharply. He shrugged, back in the marketplace. Caught a blade in the side. Nothing fatal, but she could see the way he held himself. Every movement was careful, controlled, like he was holding his body together through will alone. Before she could insist, they stop. The sound of heavy boots filled the air. Enemy soldiers were moving toward them from both ends of the street. The human's eyes flicked to the shadows above a half-collapsed balcony. Up there, he said. She followed his gaze. How? You can barely just climb, he interrupted, his voice leaving no room for argument. They scaled the broken wall as quietly as they could. Ducking behind the remains of the balcony, from their new vantage point, they could see the soldiers moving below, scanning the alley with their weapons. The human raised his gun, but his hand trembled slightly. Lyra reached out and lowered it. You're bleeding too much, she whispered. He gave her a faint, amused look. You planning to carry me out of here? She didn't answer. The truth was, if he fell now, she would try, even if it killed her. The soldiers passed beneath them, their voices echoing in the street. As soon as they were gone, the human moved to climb down, and that's when it happened. A sudden noise from the rooftop above, the whine of a sniper scope locking onto a target. The human shoved Lyra aside. The shot rang out. He staggered. For a moment, she thought he had dodged it. Then she saw the red bloom spreading across his shoulder. He dropped to one knee, his weapon clattering to the floor. Lyra's heart slammed against her ribs. The sniper fired again. But this time, she grabbed the human's gun and returned fire. Her shot hit the edge of the rooftop, forcing the sniper back. She crouched beside him, her hands pressing against the wound. He hissed in pain but didn't push her away. You need to keep moving, he said, through clenched teeth. I'm not leaving you, she shot back. Lyra, no. Her voice cracked, but she didn't care. You didn't leave me when I could barely stand. I'm not leaving you now. His eyes softened for just a moment, but then his jaw tightened again. Then help me up. She hooked his arm over her shoulder, feeling his weight press down on her. He was heavier than she expected, but she forced her legs to keep moving. They slipped through another alley, moving slow. Every step felt like an eternity. The sound of pursuit grew behind them. The sniper had called in reinforcements. They reached a side street and ducked into a small, abandoned workshop. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and the smell of rust. Lyra helped him to a workbench and quickly searched the room. She found a torn piece of cloth and a jar of antiseptic. When she turned back to him, he was watching her with that same calm, steady gaze. "You've done this before," he said. "I've had too," she replied. Kneeling to work on his wound, her hands were shaking slightly, but she forced herself to focus. She cleaned the blood away and wrapped the cloth tight around his shoulder. He didn't flinch, though his jaw clenched hard. When she was done, she stepped back. "That should hold until we get somewhere safe." He gave a faint smile. "Safe," he repeated, as if the word was foreign in this place. Outside, the sound of soldiers was growing closer. The human reached for his weapon, but Lyra stopped him. "You can't fight like this, then you'll have to fight for both of us," he said simply. Her stomach tightened at the weight of that responsibility. But when the first shadow appeared in the doorway, she didn't hesitate. She struck with her blade. Forcing the enemy back, the human fired from his position on the bench, his aim still deadly. Despite the injury, they worked together again. Only this time, she was the one protecting him. The fight was short but brutal. When the last soldier fell, Lyra dropped to her knees beside him. His breathing was heavy, but he was still conscious. "You okay?" she asked. He gave a tired grin. Still not dead. But as she looked at the blood still seeping through the bandage, she knew they couldn't keep this pace. If she didn't find somewhere safe soon, he wouldn't be able to keep walking. And she refused to watch him fall. She glanced toward the door. "The ruined city beyond. We'll make it," she whispered, almost like a promise. He closed his eyes briefly. "I believe you," he murmured. For the first time since the battle began, it wasn't his strength keeping her going, it was her own. The workshop was silent, except for the faint crackle of distant fire. Lyra stood near the doorway, her blade in hand, watching the dark street outside. The human sat on the workbench, his wounded shoulder wrapped tight, his breathing steady but shallow. They both knew this quiet wouldn't last. The enemy had been chasing them all day. They wouldn't stop now, if anything. The fact that both of them had survived this long would make the hunt more aggressive. A low rumble reached them. From the east, the sound of heavy vehicles. From the west came the steady march of boots. They were being closed in from both sides. Lyra turned to him. "They're surrounding us," she said, her voice low. The human didn't look surprised. They'd been trying to do that since the first shot. He slid off the bench, wincing slightly but staying upright. "Then, we make them pay for it." She stared at him. "You can't fight like this. Doesn't matter." He cut her off. "If this is where it ends, we make sure it's worth something." He moved toward the back wall, pulling a piece of tarp off what looked like a heavy crate. Inside was a set of tools, broken electronics, and, hidden under them, a handful of explosives. Lyra's eyes widened. "You had these the whole time?" "Not much use until now," he said, starting to check the detonators. The sound of engines was getting louder. Shadows shifted outside as enemy soldiers began to spread out. Surrounding the workshop, the human looked at her. "They'll hit from both sides at once. When they do, we split their attention." She frowned. "That's suicide." He gave a faint smile. "Everything we've done today has been..." The first blast of gunfire tore through the front wall, sending splinters flying. Lyra dropped low, gripping her blade tighter. The human tossed her one of the explosives. "Use it when you see a cluster." They didn't have to wait long. The front door was kicked open. Red-visared soldiers pouring in, weapons blazing. The human moved to the side, firing with one hand, the other bracing against the wall for balance. Lyra darted forward, using the wreckage as cover, slashing at the first soldier who got close. From the back wall came the sound of breaking glass, another squad forcing their way in through the rear. The human turned, firing a quick burst. The enemies fell, but more stepped over them. Shouting orders, the air was filled with the sharp crack of weapons, the hum of energy blades, and the deep boom of explosives. Lyra hurled her charge toward the front squad. It detonated with a sharp flash, taking out several at once. The blast shook the floor, dust raining from the ceiling. But there were too many. Every time one fell, another took his place. The human's face was pale now, sweat glistening on his skin. Yet his aim stayed deadly. Every shot counted, every movement precise. A soldier lunged for Lyra from the side. Before she could react, the human was there. Shoving her out of the way and taking the hit across his arm, he staggered but stayed on his feet. "You okay?" he asked her, even as blood ran down to his hand. She could only nod, her throat tight. They were being pushed toward the center of the room. Enemies surrounded them on all sides, the circle tightening. Lyra's heart pounded. This was it. No. Way out, the human glanced at the last explosive in his hand. Then he looked at her. "If they take us, they'll make it slow," he said quietly. She swallowed hard. "Then they don't take us," she replied, her voice firm, despite the fear. Clawing at her chest, a deep roar filled the air, an explosion far outside. The walls shook, dust and smoke flooding the workshop through the haze. She heard unfamiliar shouts, not the enemy's language, but something else. The human's eyes narrowed. "That's not them," he muttered. The front wall caved in as a massive vehicle burst through. Armored and bristling with guns, its cannons opened fire, tearing into the enemy soldiers. Lyra shielded her face from the spray of debris. When she looked again, she saw figures jumping down from the vehicle. Soldiers, but not the enemies. Their armor was marked with blue symbols she didn't recognize. The human grabbed her arm. "Friendlies," he said, though his voice held a note of surprise. The new arrivals moved with brutal efficiency, cutting down the remaining enemies and forcing the survivors to retreat. When the gunfire finally stopped, the workshop was in ruins. Lyra stood in the middle of it, breathing hard. The human leaned against the wall, clearly exhausted but still on his feet. One of the blue-marked soldiers approached, saluting sharply. "Sir, we got your signal." "Thought we were too late?" The human gave a faint smirk, cutting it close. Lyra looked between them. "You called them?" He nodded slightly. "Not for me." For you, she didn't know what to say. Her chest was still tight from the battle. From the thought that they might not have made it, he straightened, wincing. "Let's get out of here before they regroup." As they stepped toward the waiting vehicle, Lyra glanced back at the battlefield they had held together. It was nothing but wreckage now, but in her mind, it was the place where she had learned that even in the worst fight, two people could stand together and refuse to fall. The armored vehicle rumbled away from the burning district inside. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and metal. Lyra sat across from the human, her blade resting against her knees. He leaned back against the steel wall, his eyes half closed, but alert. Outside, the night sky glowed orange from the fires they had left behind. The sounds of distant explosions still echoed through the ruined city for the first time since they met. There were no enemies chasing them. The battle was over. For now, one of the blue-marked soldiers sitting near the door glanced at the human. "Your signal was weak." "Took us hours to triangulate," he said. The human gave a faint smirk. "You got here when it mattered." Lyra listened quietly, realizing he had called for help long before they met. He had known someone might come, but he hadn't waited. He had still stepped into that street for her, alone. Her eyes drifted to his injured shoulder. The bandage was soaked through again. "You need proper medical attention," she said, her voice firm. He shrugged. I've had worse." "You're a terrible liar," she muttered. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. The vehicle slowed as they reached a temporary camp outside the city. Rows of makeshift tents and armored vehicles surrounded by barricades. Soldiers moved quickly between them, carrying supplies and treating the wounded. The smell of burned fuel and antiseptic mixed in the cold night air. The human stood, wincing as he stepped out. Lyra followed. Staying close, the camp felt strange to her, safe. But only because of the guns pointed outward. He led her toward the medical tent, where a medic rushed over. "You're hurt," the medic said, eyeing both of them. "I'm fine," Lyra replied quickly. "Treat him first," she added, nodding toward the human. The medic guided him inside, and Lyra waited just outside the flap. She could hear the faint sound of his voice answering questions, the medic giving short, clipped instructions. Minutes passed, then he stepped out again, his shoulder freshly bandaged, his skin pale, but his eyes steady. "They want you to rest," Lyra said. He shook his head. "No time for that. The city isn't safe." "Not yet. You just fought through half their army," she argued, "and they'll send the other half tomorrow." He replied simply. She studied him for a long moment. When they had met, she had thought he was reckless, just another fighter looking for trouble. Now she understood he was something else entirely. He was a man who would walk into hell if it meant pulling someone else out. That night, they sat near a small fire at the edge of the camp. The cold wind cut through the air, but the flames kept it at bay. Lyra watched the sparks rise into the dark sky. "I thought I was going to die today," she admitted, her voice quiet. He didn't look at her when he answered. "Me too." A faint smile curved her lips. "But we didn't." "No, he said we didn't." She hesitated before asking, "Why me? You could have walked away." "You didn't even know my name." He finally looked at her, his gaze steady in the firelight. "Because no one else came," he said, repeating the same words from the battlefield. "And because I couldn't watch you fall when I could still stand." Something in her chest tightened. In her world, promises were fragile, easily broken. But this man had kept his without even speaking it. After a long silence, she said softly, "Then I promise you this. If you fall, I'll be there." He studied her for a moment, then gave a slow nod. "Fair trade," he said, in the distance. The city smoldered under the moonlight. Tomorrow, there would be more fighting, more danger. But for now, they sat together. The fire between them, not allies by chance anymore, but partners bound by the kind of trust only forged in the worst of battles. As the night deepened, Lyra realized something. She wasn't just alive because of him, she was alive with him, and no matter what came next, she wasn't going to let go of that.